filmmakers who were of Jewish origin had really were either killed during the war and during the Holocaust, or had to flee and to go to America, or mostly to America. But that was really a problem, and they vanished. I mean, from time to time, I mean, for instance, Hans Gall had a very important career before the war, between the two wars, the First and the Second World Wars. And what is most surprising is the fact that he went to Scotland for a good reason, which is that when he arrived in Britain in 1939, he was arrested by the British as what was called an enemy alien, because he was from German origin, and he was accused, or he was suspected of being a spy, as all German citizens who were living and who were in exile in Britain, as it was also the case in France. We have in France 900 camps in which these people were put for a period of time before being released, and for them, some of them of Jewish origins, they were not released, they were kept and then given to the Germans. So it explains why these people disappeared completely. So what can we learn from this? And that's the main thing which I would like to tell you in this workshop. We perform these works, and I've written a book about these composers about 20 years ago. And I've founded also an organization which is called the Stifled Voices Forum. I mean, voices which are Erstickte Stimmen Forum auf Deutsch. And les Forum Voix Étouffées in French. Just to rediscover the music of these people, because they are masterworks, really, waiting just to be rediscovered or played for the first time. And it's also the fact that when these composers went to America, they very often wrote a music that was too modern for the American public. So they became very often teachers, or they taught at university, but their music was too complicated and not really fit for a usual and average American audience. So they went on, you know, they arrived, and some of them died in 2000, in year 2000, or a bit before, so rather late in the century. But the fact is that most of the music remained in libraries. So when you want to have to get the scores, you have to call or to get in touch with the library of the university where they were working, and you have to ask for such manuscript. It's a manuscript. They are manuscripts. They are not printed, so it's rather complicated. It's a long way to get all the music, but it's very often the only way to get this music performed and shown to the public. So that's one of the difficulties. And the second reason is, so the first one was, of course, a musical project to rediscover simply new works. And, well, you're not musicians, so maybe it will be difficult to understand what I'm going to say. But, you know, I'm a conductor. I've been a conductor for 40 years. I'm a composer as well. And I love Brahms. I love Mozart. I love all the classics. But I'm fed up with them. I mean, I've conducted too many times symphonies by Mozart, symphonies by Brahms, and because the organizers very often in the classical field are not very open-minded in terms of programs and in terms of works which are shown or performed in front of the public, because they think that the public is too ignorant, or they would refuse it, or they wouldn't like it because it's too complicated or too modern, or there's always a good reason not to do it. So that's my point. And for me, it's been since for 20 years, it has been the solution to avoid performing Mozart. I do it as I tell it as a joke, but it's partly true. it has opened my own repertoire and my knowledge of all these composers, and there are over 500, 1,000, there are many composers and many tens of thousands of works which are awaiting to be rediscovered, as I said, and to be simply performed in front of an audience, which on top of that considers these people as extremely modern, since they don't know their names, and because they were born in most of the time they were born in the beginning of the 20th century. So that makes things even more difficult, all this. So rediscovering composers, discovering new works, that's one point. The second point is a political point, and that is very important. When we started this project, Forum Voix Étouffées, in 2002, we did it because we had the support of the Austrian Österreichisches Kulturforum, the Ministry of European Affairs in Vienna, and the representatives in France, and where I was located at that time. Why did they do it? The question is, why do they trust a French musician to rediscover Austrian musicians? It's more the work, it should be the job of Austrian musicians. The reason why, part of the reason was that in 2002 you had in Austria a combination between the center and the extreme right at the government. And it had been a scandal, an unbelievable scandal. I mean, Austria had been put aside in Europe by many countries, including France. And I think that the reason why the diplomacy, the Austrian diplomacy supported that project is because it helped them to showing that all Austrians were not fascists. And so there was a background, and a political background in that case, which was very important. And then we organized several festivals and many concerts, etc., etc. And then we moved. Once we went with a film crew, and we went to Auschwitz, and with a group of musicians, and we organized a concert not in the museum, not in the camp, because it would have been inappropriate, I would say. And I'm not sure I would have done it, but we did it at the music school of the city. Auschwitz is a city of 45,000 inhabitants, and there was, before the war, half of the population was Jewish. It's important to know that. And of course, in Poland, most of the people coming from Auschwitz, the Jewish population of Auschwitz, was killed during the Holocaust. So it was symbolically very important that we go there. And I realized that we had a wonderful tool to explain the history of Holocaust to the younger generations. You know, when we started 2002, when we were the first time in Auschwitz, 2009, and that was the time we realized that most of the witnesses that had been interned in Auschwitz or in other death camps and who had survived, most of them were going to disappear. Most of them were already dead, naturally. But so that would mean that we wouldn't have, in a few years, we will not have any survivor from this period that will be able to witness directly what they experienced, how they lived this situation, the terrible situation of the death camps and the ghettos and the annihilation of the Jewish people in Europe. And you have to realize that this Holocaust, this annihilation of Jewish people, is the basis of today's Europe. It's because that happened that Europe was founded. Because not only we wanted peace, but we wanted also to avoid that such terrible events happen again. So the importance of performing these musicians is double. It's rediscovering the music, but also speaking about the Holocaust, speaking about the cultural consequences. When you kill 6 million people, think about it. What can you get in terms of culture? I mean, simply the destruction of a genocide. You know what a genocide is? You know that, you know the word, of course. And you know the definition of genocide. Do you know that? Do you know it? Yes. You know that culture is part of the definition. I mean, the destruction of a culture, even if you don't kill the people, but if you destroy their cultural expression, that's a part of a genocide. So it's really speaking and transmitting the memory of this culture, which has disappeared, and the memory of these people, the memory of the events. That's most important. And on top of that, you are now the generation which is going to have to transmit it to be, you are going to be the next witnesses. Because I will have spoken to you, you will have met other people who will have to told you the same thing, spoken about the same topics, and told you the history. And it's absolutely necessary that you yourself take in charge this question, and that you explain it to others, to your comrades at school, to your universities, or on well, whoever you meet, and it's a very important duty that we have to history, and not only to history, but to ourselves. I mean, when you consider that Europe has developed over the last 30 years on the dream that peace would be here forever, look at what is going on in Ukraine. We have a war at our doors, which we haven't foreseen, and nothing tells us that the Russian people, and more the Russian government, will stop at Ukraine. I mean, all the northern countries, from Finland to the Baltic countries, are fearing, or even Poland, are fearing that the Russian troops could attack them. So that means that Europe is now threatened by to be at war, and it's very important that also we develop a conscience of a European, being a European is, what our values are, what our democratic values are in comparison to the other totalitarianisms, because Russia is totalitarian, China is totalitarian, many countries in the world are back to totalitarianism, and we have to be conscious as citizens, als Bürger von dieser Region in Europa. Das ist wirklich wichtig, eine Pflicht, die sie haben, und dass natürlich unsere Generation hat. Entschuldigung, I'm just mixing with German. So that's basically, that's the idea that we want to transmit through these events. I can tell you more about the project itself if you are interested, if you want to have more information. I mean, we are, this time, it's probably the 6th or 7th European project I organize, and we are, this time it's the biggest, because we have 20 partners from 12 European countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, France, Italy, Austria, Germany, Portugal, what else? And a few others, Czech Republic, etc., etc. And we have, among our partners, we have musical institutions like this orchestra, which is based in Italy, that comes from L'Aquila, and it's one of the very best chamber orchestra in Italy, string orchestra. And we have also other musical partners in Austria, in France, in Germany as well. We have festivals, like Festival Junge Künstler zum Beispiel. We have universities, because we organize also international conferences. We had an international conference in Vienna about 2 months ago on the topic of music and resistance, and how, for instance, music was a very important point in the development of the spirit of independence against Russia in the Baltic countries between 1987 and 1991, when the Russians left these countries and gave not easily, but gave them their independence, admitted that they would be independent. And music played a role, a very important role, because it's all the story of the independence of these countries started with music, by musicians, and most of the time the rallies against the Russians were organized by musicians. And it's something which we ignore. Most of us, even myself, a few years ago, I had absolutely no inkling of what the story was. And that's important to see that culture may, from time to time, play a part into politics, and really important parts, because some sort of music, I'm not talking about that sort of classical stuff, but I'm talking about popular music, pop, or even heavy metal, or that sort of rock. Rock plays a very important role in the fall of the communist regime in 1991. In all the countries that were under communism, you had a resistance that was organized through music, and through rock bands in East Germany, in Hungary, etc. Most of these countries had groups that were singing and making music against the regime. That's a very important thing to know and to realize. So that means that we, as individuals, we can play a part also. Not only we can vote, of course, as citizens, but we can be engaged in the cultural field for transmitting all this, the questions we were talking now, the history of Holocaust, but we can also draw conclusions and draw also not only conclusions, but draw some principles that could help us to change the present reality, and to avoid, for instance, to try to avoid as citizens, or even if we work, if we are a member of a political party or whatever, to play a part in order to save democracy, to keep democracy alive, etc., etc. And that's why the European Union supports this project, because the European Commission wants absolutely, they have been looking for years now to develop among the younger generation and the European citizens in general the idea that we all have a common culture. I read quite recently in a paper an article written by an Italian journalist, and he was saying, you know, when he's posted in France, in Paris, for an Italian paper, and he wrote, well, I'm in Paris in front of, do you know Paris? Yes? Do you know La Madeleine, the church? The church looks like a Greek temple. It's really the Parthenon. It's a huge one. And he says, when I'm in front of the Madeleine in Paris, I think of Athens, of course. And when I'm in Athens, I think of Rome, because the Romans have imitated 2,000 years ago the Greek architecture. So, and he draws the conclusion he draws from this these remarks is that we are different peoples in Europe. We have different cultures, but we have so many things in common that we should develop them. We should develop what we have in common and not develop what cuts us from the others, that separates us from the other people. And the idea of this European project is also to integrate this idea that we are all members of a great continent, one of the biggest actually, in terms of the richest. And we have a common history which is terrible, because the Holocaust was present everywhere in Europe. And Europe is really, as I said, based on the consequences of the Holocaust. So these are all the ideas we have to deal with when we prepare our projects, and when we think how we can use music and the story of these musicians simply to develop this European mind and this European common and global culture that we should have, and that in reality we have already. But we have, that these are things that have to be reminded from time to time. And when you go, I suppose you travel a lot. Now it's a bit more complicated, but a few years ago, if you could see on almost all the big works, the bridges, motorways, the European flag, because Europe has invested so much in economical stuff and economical policies in every country, but also, and you have to know it, in the cultural field as well, in order to remind us that we need to be more European. And that will be my conclusion. Any questions? What do you think? What I've just said. Do you feel? Does it ring a bell for you?
I have a question, because you said like the work musicians helped to start a revolution or something like this.
Yes.
And I was thinking about it, whether music is maybe a little bit like something innocent, something which is not so gefährlich for the Tyrannen or something like this. Do you think it's like this? Because otherwise they...
On the contrary, yeah. For the Tyrannen it's really very sehr gefährlich eigentlich.
But why don't they do warum ersticken sie es nicht im Keim? Also warum ist es dann bei Musikern, also warum ist es leichter dann als Rockmusiker? Kann man dann sozusagen da öffentlich dagegen gehen und die machen dann nichts? Oder war das nicht so?
Aber die waren alle im Gefängnis.
Ah, okay.
Alle waren fast alle diese Gruppen im Gefängnis waren. Aber das geschah wirklich sehr, sehr nah also am Ende der 70er Jahre zum Beispiel. Oder auch und während der 80er Jahre, das war wirklich am Ende des Regimes. Früher war es unmöglich, Musik als politischen Werkzeug zu benutzen. Es war wirklich zu gefährlich einfach. Die Folgen waren einfach Gefängnis und manchmal Tod. Also ich habe zum Beispiel über Weinberg gesprochen. Die Geschichte von Weinberg ist sehr, sehr interessant. Also er suchte Zuflucht in Russland. Und dann wurde er war der Schwiegersohn eines sehr bekannten Schauspielers des Namens Solomon Michaels. Der war einer der größten jüdischen Schauspieler Russlands. Und der war von Stalin 1948, glaube ich, ermordet. Und ein paar Jahre später wurde der Weinberg, sein Schwiegersohn, eigentlich verhaftet über angeblich, also Anklage, dass er eine sogenannte Verschwörung gegen Stalin organisiert wollte. Das war natürlich nicht wahr. Er war ein armer Komponist, er hatte wirklich mit Politik überhaupt nichts zu tun. Und Er wurde wahrscheinlich gerettet, weil Stalin ein paar Monate später gestorben ist. Sonst wäre er wahrscheinlich ermordet, genau wie sein Schwiegervater.
Okay. Das ist immer eine Person.
Also das ist die gleiche Geschichte. Nur die Russen haben keine Holocaust organisiert. Sie haben nur Vertreibung, sie haben so viele andere Verbrechen sowieso gemacht und sie sind dafür verantwortlich. Aber nicht zu dem Punkt eines Holocausts. So, do you want to become witnesses on this topic? Does it seem something? I'm not trying to recruit you. Don't worry. But it's just so that you take into consideration the fact that you are important individually for transmitting these stories. Read about it. Try to. I don't know whether you know Theresienstadt, for instance. You ever heard of Theresien? Yes? Okay. Well, I met someone, in Theresien that was something absolutely terrible, because you had a cultural life that was organized for propaganda reasons. And the Nazis authorized a musical life, and they authorized also, for instance, the performances of children opera, because there were children. The families were arrested and put in this camp, and you had children and the parents. So this opera for children allowed them to be part of this cultural life and musical life. The fact is that most of them were deported during the performances. So every day or every month you had a transport, and part of the chorus where the children sang just disappeared somewhere in the east, Auschwitz or another death camp. So that's an incredible story, and you have survivors, people who were children at the time, who were in Theresien and who survived, and who started explaining this story. But very late, actually. I met a few of them, and I invited one of these women, who was a Czech citizen. And she explained how it was that, and how they saw the fellows disappear. And, so can you imagine what it means? And I'm not trying to make it sound or look more like something usable, if I may say so, something. That I would use to get some tears and so to get some reaction from you. It's just the reality, the truth that happened like that. So for the memory of these children, we have to do something individually. That's it. That's basically what I want to tell you.
How did you start with these topics, or how did it start that you got so interested in this, and how that it was so important to you?
I understand. It started because at the beginning of my activity as a conductor, I came across a piece by Schreker, the same Schreker that we're going to perform tonight. And I found the music so exciting. I mean, I had never heard something like this. I thought, my God, how is it possible that I had a very good musical education? How is it possible that I don't know that name first? And then I want to do it. As a musician, I want to conduct this music. And it started by a musical project. And the idea of joining the music in itself and politics came afterwards. when I started writing my book. And I wrote my book not because I'm a writer, it's not my job at all. Something else should have done it, not me. But nobody did it. And in the early 2000s, I told myself, okay, if no one wants to do it, I'll do it. So I spent 5 years studying the topic rather thoroughly, and there was absolutely nothing in French literature about this topic. That's also interesting. Why? Why want people to stay blind? Why is the university not interested in such a topic? Why? You see what I mean?
Thank you.
But the music is, of course, the center of.
And
Yes?
another question: what is the name of the book, and is it in English or German?
Also es gibt eine deutsche Übersetzung. Der Titel lautet, was ist das? Erstickte Stimmen im Dritten Reich. Ziel war nicht natürlich, dieses Buch zu verkaufen oder irgendeine Werbung für das Buch zu machen. Aber es wurde vor 12 Jahren übersetzt. Wie gesagt, Erstickte Stimmen im Dritten Reich, Untertitel Entartete Musik. Bitte. Okay. Kommen Sie zum Konzert? Gut. Also wir sehen uns ja in ein paar Minuten.
Danke.
Schön. Bitte sehr. Danke, dass Sie gekommen sind, sowieso.